All right, so hopefully you guys can see that okay. So as Morgan mentioned, I am Melissa Schneider, the Communications and Development Manager for the Ontario Farmland Trust. It is a new role for me. I've only been with the organization for a couple of weeks, so it's nice to be able to sort of speak on behalf of the Ontario Farmland Trust this evening. I'm going to be speaking about the value of Ontario's farmland beyond the soil class. To begin, I wanted to give you guys a quick rundown of the Ontario Farmland Trust. We are the only registered charity in Ontario with a province-wide mission to protect Ontario farmlands, including the associated agricultural, natural, and cultural features. We have been in existence since 2004, but the idea for the Ontario Farmland Trust took shape at a workshop on farmland preservation hosted by the University of Guelph in 2002. Farm and conservation groups came together to discuss concerns about farmland loss in Ontario, and a strong agreement emerged that an innovative land trust model should be developed to facilitate a system between land conservation and agriculture. The idea and the intent was for the organization to have a role in direct land protection, research, and public education. In 2004, OFT became an incorporated not-for-profit and gained charitable status. Our board of directors members have included representation from Ontario's major farm organizations such as the Ontario Federation of Agriculture and the Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario, as well as academics, researchers, planners, and other land conservation advocates. OFT's board and staff provide a variety of skills such as management, land securement, endangered species identification, outreach, and personal farming experience. OFT is the only organization with a province-wide mandate to defend, protect, and preserve our best farmlands. We focus on three main activities: direct land protection through farmland easement agreements and land donations, policy development for improved farmland protection, and research and education to advance land protection and related policy development. OFT is unique as well as we are the only land trust in Ontario with a focus on protecting agriculture. So our main activities include protecting farmland on the ground through donations of farmland or farmland easement agreements. Farmland easement agreements are voluntary, legally binding, and permanent agreements that can limit the future use of a property to agriculture and conservation purposes only. The landowner retains ownership, and the agreement does not impact land ownership or farm business. It just means that the conservation rights are donated to the Ontario Farmland Trust to steward in perpetuity. They are also an effective tool for succession planning as they ensure the land remains in agriculture forever. The Conservation Lands Act. So we are able to protect farmland forever using these easement agreements because of the Conservation Lands Act of 1990, wherein a landowner may grant an easement to or enter into a covenant with one or more conservation bodies for the following reasons, including for the protection of agricultural lands, an addition that was made in 2005. So this is a map of all of the farms that Ontario Farmland Trust has protected to date. So throughout central, eastern, and southwestern Ontario, we have protected 17 properties that total over 1,600 acres, and that number only continues to grow. We are also working on a number of new easements that will increase our reach throughout Ontario and protect an additional 1,000 acres of farmland and natural habitat. We also regularly submit comments on changes to provincial policies that affect farmland. For instance, in the last year, we have provided commentary on the Growing the Greenbelt initiative, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, Highway 413, and minister's zoning orders, calling for increased protections for farmland across Ontario. We also host an annual Farmland Forum in March, an event that brings together planners, farmers, researchers, politicians, and more to explore opportunities for farmland protection in provincial land use planning policy. We host expert speakers from Ontario and across North America to hear new concepts about farmland protection. Every year, we choose a new theme that is relevant to the issues around farmland protection that we are facing currently. According to the 2016 Census of Agriculture, we are losing over 175 acres of farmland every day to urbanization and other land use changes in Ontario, which equates to approximately 130,000 acres per year. So over the last 30 years, we've lost almost 2 million acres. This rate of loss is unsustainable, and it does not just affect farmers now. The loss of our farmland will affect future generations of farmers and non-farmers alike. Currently, most protections for farmland outlined in the provincial land use planning policies are focused on protecting prime agricultural land. Prime agricultural lands are generally made up of soils that have been designated as classes 1 to 3 by the Canada Land Inventory. The CLI is a wide-scale soil survey that was done in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that ranked soils into 7 classes based on how capable a soil would be at producing a traditional row crop such as corn, soybeans, and wheat. Outside of specific provincial land use plans, such as the Greenbelt Plan, only prime agricultural lands receive protections in provincial policy. However, even those protections are not strong enough to prevent farmland loss in areas where development pressures are high. We have a finite amount of agricultural land available to us in Ontario, and once we lose it, we cannot get it back. As you can see here, different classes of agricultural soil are often interspersed amongst each other. If we choose to only protect farmland of high CLI classes, we will fragment and weaken our land base. The CLI land classes do not account for all of the factors that affect the productivity of an agricultural soil, and soils that do not fall into the prime agricultural classification can be very productive. In fact, we are actually able to work around limitations a soil might have by using specific management techniques. For instance, we are able to change both the nutrient levels and the soil organic matter levels to make soils more productive. Ontario's agricultural sector is diverse, producing over 200 different commodities on a commercial scale. Many of these crops require unique growing conditions and are able to thrive on farmland that falls outside of the 1 to 3 classes. Ontario is also home to a number of microclimates that provide growing conditions that we cannot replicate anywhere else. Even soils of lower classes in these microclimates are unique and extremely valuable. The CLI inventory was created with a focus on typical row crops, and as such, the classification of farmland using the CLI inventory may not be an accurate representation of the land's suitability for crops that fall outside of that realm. When farmland of all CLI classes is protected, it ensures that there is land available to host all types of agriculture. So, what is possible on farmlands that are not considered prime agriculture? Some crops require growing conditions that might not be ideal for row crops and therefore thrive on lands that aren't considered prime agriculture. For instance, some tender fruit crops like grapes, peaches, and more do well on sandier soil that drains quickly that could be considered poor for the production of typical row crops like corn or soybeans. That being said, a thriving wine industry can be built on lands that are not considered to be prime agriculture. Aside from these crops, there are also a number of crops that are not picky and can do well on a variety of soils, such as onions, hay, and pasture land. Additionally, agriculture in Ontario is constantly evolving, and it is not reasonable to exclude any possibilities. Land that may not be considered good for agriculture, especially now, may well be suited for different crops in the future. There is also a critical mass of farmland, that is needed to maintain the viability of any agricultural system. Without farmland, farming is not possible. Farmlands of lower CLI classes are valuable resources that add to this critical mass. Farmland also provides a range of ecosystem services that benefit the surrounding landscape. They can sequester carbon and even provide habitat for wildlife. Some species at risk, like the bobolink pictured here, rely on pastures and hayfields for breeding and foraging, as their native grassland habitat is now scarce in Ontario due to human activity. And permanent pasture lands used by species such as the bobolink are well suited to lower classes of farmland. Additionally, farmland can also filter and store water, which can actually improve water quality in surrounding aquatic systems. When development occurs on farmland, the impacts are far-reaching. Farmland is capable of absorbing and storing rainwater, which enables it to delay the rainwater from entering into rivers and streams for a small period of time. This is beneficial because it prevents downstream erosion and flooding by slowing the speed at which the water enters and runs through a watercourse. In contrast, non-agricultural development on farmland creates impermeable surfaces which prevent rain and meltwater from infiltrating the soil, instead sending it into the stormwater management systems. That puts more pressure on these systems and does not give the soil the opportunity to filter the water of any pollutants it may have picked up. As a result, any pollutants present in the water may pass directly into the water system, which can impact the health of the body of water that receives it. It also prevents groundwater resources from being recharged by rainwater when it is carried away through a stormwater management system. Additionally, farmers are constantly making strides to reduce their environmental impact, and it has even been shown that some modern farming techniques actually release less phosphorus into the water, and that, I'm sorry, I lost my place for a moment, and that, as well, some of the uses that are best suited to lower classes of farmland and that do not disturb the soils as much can actually be really great at helping filter and store water before it ends up in nearby aquatic systems. So what is needed going forward? Ontario's farmland is a non-renewable resource, the loss of which will impact future generations greatly. Even though there are some protections in place in provincial policy, we are still losing farmland. Clearly, we need stronger, more widespread protections for all of Ontario's farmland. The best way to ensure the strength of our agricultural sector is to protect our diverse array of agricultural soils, to ensure that we are always able to produce a range of agricultural products. Increasing protection for farmland of all CIL classes ensures that there is land available for all types of agriculture, and that will help protect the viability of our agricultural sector in the long term. So I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you so much to the people who funded this project. It was funded through the Greenbelt and the Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario. I am a stand-in this evening for my colleague Emma Jane. She is our ecology coordinator, and she is the one who created this presentation. I did not know much about the different classes of soils before I started working for the Ontario Farmland Trust, and now I definitely have a better understanding. So thank you so much for having me out today, and thank you to Gabe and Morgan for arranging this, and thank you to all of you for listening to me. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them, and anything that I don't have an answer to this evening, I will make sure that I get back to you.
I have a question. So are these easements like gifts to the OFT, or how does that work?
Yeah, so a farmland easement agreement is basically just, it goes on the title of a property. It's just sort of legally binding that the land will stay as agriculture in perpetuity. The Ontario Farmland Trust doesn't own the land. The farmer retains the ownership rights to the land, but the Ontario Farmland Trust works with the owner to be able to steward the properties going forward. So once a year, Emma Jane, she goes out to every property and she just makes sure that everything in the easement agreements that was agreed upon originally is just being upheld and maintained.
Okay. Has OFT, I mean, I know you're fairly new to the role, but ever considered advocating for a program similar to what the USDA has, where a farmer can sell their conservation rights, and like basically what you get, you sell them in the dollars per acre change depending on like how close you are to impending development. Is that something OFT has ever considered pursuing with the government to try and increase protection of farmland? Or?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure, and I can get back to you on that. I think that would be quite interesting. Right now, I think that the farmer who is interested in putting a farmland easement on their property, they do receive a tax receipt, especially if there is, I think, a discrepancy between sort of the start price and the end price after the easement goes on to the title. And sometimes that's almost a good thing, because then the farmer might be willing to perhaps sell his acreage for a little bit less, to help the next generation kind of pick up the gauntlet and be able to move into the sector.
Great, thanks.
Yes, my question, I love the idea of this. I own some land right in the middle of probably one of the, we're just east of Toronto near Lake Ontario, and it's highly pressured for development. And my question is how does a farmer farm if he's got downtown Toronto all around him? If you got a plot of land of 150 acres and you're growing apples or something and you're spraying at night and whatever, the amount of pressure from neighbors if development is all around you, is there any way of protecting your right to farm and not, it could become very problematic. So if you lock your land into this trust, and then you get apartments and housing all around that piece of property, it's pretty tough to farm. It's probably you're not capable or have the information, sorry, of answering that question. But has it been asked before? And is there any, it's complicated, but it's a scary thing, because I love this idea. I'd love to keep my land in the farm for 1,000 years, but if the people that own the farm down the road can't farm it because of the urban sprawl that's right around them, it becomes kind of useless.
Okay, well, that is an excellent question to which I do not have the answer, but I will definitely talk to my boss, Catherine, and we can get back to you on that. If I can take my Ontario Farmland Trust hat off for a moment and put my Elgin Federation of Agriculture presidential hat on, so that I'm not speaking for the trust. I know down here in Elgin, for example, one of the things that we've been pitching to our county council is sort of a realtor's introductory package to agriculture for people who are perhaps moving from an urban area who are unfamiliar with what constitutes like a normal farm practice, just so that when properties come up for sale, and not necessarily for development, but just you know, kind of person to person sales, that the realtors can be armed with this kind of information going in, so that people hopefully purchasing these properties that are located right, you know, within a stone's throw of somebody's farm, have a general understanding of, you know, why you have a helicopter running at 3 o'clock in the morning if your cherries are at risk of freezing, or you know, why you're using your bird bangers in the early morning to make sure that your apples don't get eaten, or right. And it is a little bit difficult. It's definitely a complicated issue, and you know, like urban and agriculture do to some degree have to have an understanding and learn how to sort of co-live with each other. But as far as the Ontario Farmland Trust goes, ask me again when I'm a year into this position. But for right now, I would definitely have to chat with my boss, Catherine. So if you would like an answer to your question, by all means, I will reach out to Gabe and Morgan probably tonight when I'm offline and get your information, and I will follow up with you and we will make sure that you receive an answer.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Melissa. I didn't know a whole lot about the Ontario Farmland Trust. I'm not sure if anybody else here had that much of an understanding. So I really appreciate the information you provided us tonight and joining us. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Have a great evening.